Hi, my name is Jaramillo. I'm a photographer, illustrator, graphic designer, multimedia artist, podcaster, like this occasion, gardener, and I'm here with Luis Antonio Pichardo today.
Yeah. For those that have been obviously watching the podcast when we launched it last year, the DSTL Arts cast, um, the voice you might recognize. I was always behind the camera. Obviously, Abraham was in front of the camera along with Jeremy, but things have changed. So obviously, I'm now on this side of the camera, and we are officially relaunching our podcast with the new name Art Block, which is taken from the zine that we've been publishing for 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Can you believe that, man? 8 years.
I don't like because I wasn't as involved in our blog as you and Jeremy were.
Mm-hmm.
I was mainly joining the podcast and seeing how he was doing interviews, like Jeremy, who is not with us, but he was a
Mm-hmm.
really important part of our team. So
Mm-hmm.
it's good to mention him.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't as involved, but it's good to
Yeah.
know like that's a long time
I
and
know.
that's a lot of art and
Yeah.
a lot of artists that you guys covered.
Mm-hmm.
And my question to you is, what is the path of our block now?
Well, very good question. Obviously, we're here doing the first episode of the relaunch of the podcast. So Art Block is now going to be an annual zine. So every year, once a year, we will have an open call for submissions, and we will be publishing a zine, which is more like a magazine now, because we've gotten so many submissions in the past that we had to
Yeah.
actually grow. That to me is always pretty awesome.
Mhm.
The fact that we were able to take what originally started off
Mhm.
as a little handmade book. Now it's like a very polished looking
Mhm.
magazine. And so, yeah, once a year that's going to be published. And we're aiming for, I believe right now it's a June deadline for submission and publication like in July. So,
Cool. Well,
yeah.
first I want to say thanks to all the artists who have submitted previously, and it's been a blessing to, like, for example, from the previous podcast to talk to different artists. And I know we're relaunching, probably have new different surprises in the future. We're still figuring out what the shape of our block is gonna be. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's everything has to be evolving. It has to be moving, right? Like all the artists that we talk to, they have different takes on life and they have different ways of expressing themselves. So every time we try to move forward, thinking of what's next, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think one of the cool questions I want to ask Luis, and because Luis is the one that's right now most aware of what it's happening with our blog. I'm still getting to know like all the details because we're
Mm-hmm.
still working on it. It's what's the new subject for our blog?
So the new theme, and for those that have been submitting to Art Block for a long time, know we always have a theme, and this year we're doing intertextuality. So ultimately, what that means, at least the way that I would
Mm,
describe it, is conversations between art and text. Sort of like the short way of saying, how does the artwork that you create reflect, or how is it informed by the things that inspire you? So, speaking for myself,
mm,
if I'm inspired as a poet by someone like Pablo Neruda,
yeah,
obviously my poetry, when you read it, you're going to be able to pick up on
yeah,
some of those influences.
yeah.
And that's at least the theme for this issue, for volume 8.
Mm,
um, and for anybody watching this now, go ahead and check out our website,
mm.
distillarts.org/artblockzine, and you'll be able to pick up all of the information that you need.
That's I think not even just artists, but everybody in general has either watch a movie, listen to a song, or going to the museum and seeing a painting, and you can see the reaction of, oh wow, this moved me a
Mm-hmm.
certain way, right? Or I ambition this the other way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we do things differently
Mm-hmm.
because of the movie. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say we watch a romantic movie and say like, oh well, right? And
Yeah,
then you
yeah.
start talking to your girlfriend, and it turns out there's
Yeah.
something, right? It's I
Yeah.
think that's the benefit of art. It talks to you and it tells you things that you might take certain way. It's never the way sometimes the artists intend,
Hmm.
but it's definitely touching you because you read it to a certain degree and you react and you create and you behave or
Hmm.
you interpret or you think differently because of that piece. And
Hmm.
I that's the reason of our artist,
Hmm.
it always goes back to what is my mission and how people's gonna take it and how's it gonna move on, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think that that's part of the reason why I really like having things related to a theme because
Mm-hmm.
themes help people kind of explore maybe ideas or topics that they never would have explored on their own. But when you get to see how it informs
Mm-hmm.
their writing or their artwork, they might be challenging themselves in a way that's maybe different from what they're used to. That pushes them to become better and to ultimately develop skills, right? Which is one of the parts of the organization's tagline. Our name DSTL Arts stands for Develop Skills and Transcend Limits. So for me, that's always been one of the important
Mm-hmm.
reasons why themes are valuable.
Yeah, definitely. Like when either we create scenes or
Mm-hmm.
classes, I really enjoy having a theme because it creates a thing to convey or to attach all the pieces together and to create
Mm-hmm.
something that has something to relate with, like something that brings every piece into a meaningful, I guess, cohesive way of
Mm-hmm.
a booklet or a scene or a magazine, depending on
Mm-hmm.
the size, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's always that, like, it helps us uh, not reach to a common goal because each individual has its own view or thinking, but it has some way of bringing it back, like
Mm-hmm.
this is going into a certain direction, even though everybody is taking different
Mm-hmm.
paths,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So thinking of that, like, and again, it goes back to like, what's an artist that you think or that influences you or that you remember
Mm-hmm.
either lately or back? I guess we have different ones. Like I don't know, I can name a lot of it, but it's every now and then we have a little story of like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I did this because of that I
Mm-hmm.
saw or I heard,
Mm-hmm.
or it's depending on the piece, right?
Mm-hmm. Um, so you mean like for me or
Yeah,
one
for
of
you,
my
for you.
yeah.
I'll talk about mines later.
Right. Well, I mean, like I mentioned before, obviously Pablo Neruda,
Mhm.
for people that have
Yeah.
read and seen my artwork, my poetry specifically, Pablo Neruda is definitely one of the people that always has inspired me. The way that he uses words to create imagery. Like
Mm.
he, to me, has always painted pictures in my mind. Every time that I read his poetry, I can visualize it, which
Mm.
is one of those things that for me has always been really important in writing, in poetry, in music, even. Because I've always been more attracted to music that kind of does that really paints a picture for me. Um, Even if you were to look at my last book
Mm.
and read my last book,
Which is
Love Notes,
Love
that
Notes.
that particular book, you can in some moments see where I was influenced by someone like Gustavo Cerati,
Oh,
and Soda Stereo. And if you look at even some of the work because that book has like 15 years worth of poetry. So go,
15. It's not one, not two, not three.
yeah,
15 years of
uh,
like again. I mean, just saying. Put in your notes. Check the book. Just saying, because I mean, it's an artist
uh,
here who has a lot of experience in terms of
yeah,
seeing other artists and reading other artists as well as he creating his own artwork. So again, I always try to like
yeah,
plug people,
yeah,
and I mean you're here like and you're really important part of the community, and I feel like sometimes people have to think about outside the box, like
yeah.
forget about like Bad Bunny or whatever.
Right, right,
Just
right, yeah,
and go
yeah.
for the artists that are key members of your community because that's what makes your community
Mhm.
bigger. So check his book out, and 15 years is a lot,
Yeah,
dude. It's like
yeah.
I don't know.
But yeah, and I've been writing since I
Mhm.
was, uh, let's see, I first started writing when I was 14 years old. So that's a long ass time.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just making me feel old, but
But yeah, but when I started writing, if and I still have some of those works. Not from when I was 14, because when I was
Mhm.
14 years old, my mom found my book, my writing book,
uh,
and she got pretty upset, so I threw it away. But I mean, that's the thing. Like a poet is gonna poet,
yeah,
right? So I started writing again when I was like 16 years old. Just a
mhm,
couple of years later, I could not hold it in anymore,
exactly.
and so I kept on writing. And when you, for anybody that ever does
Mhm.
have the opportunity to read the work from that time period,
Yeah.
uh, you'll see that I was very much influenced by hip hop and by rap music, specifically people like Common,
Mhm.
who's an underground, or at least used to be an underground rapper. Now he's become an actor, and he's doing a lot more things that are very visible. But back then, he wasn't very well known, and he had a very particular style
Mhm.
that was more poetic, more about poetry, the poetry of music versus, just your standard rapping, ¿verdad? Entonces, for me, that was one of my early influences. And when you look at my writing from then, you will definitely see that, and you'll have moments of that in Love Notes where,
Love notes. There you
yeah,
go again, guys.
yeah.
Check it out.
So there's definitely that, right? Like I can say in my writing and my artwork that you will find those influences, and well, that was actually one of the things that I wanted to ask you too. As part of the podcast is, for you, what is maybe the most recent thing that you created, where you're able to look back and say, oh yeah, I see the influence of tal y tal in
Yeah.
that piece.
Well, it's fascinating because it's how my brain works. It's
Mm-hmm.
always, even in now that I exploring. I think for the people who are in the class of are developing skills that
Yeah.
like we're talking about like professional things and different ways of reaching the public and apps and all that. So
Mm-hmm.
I just got into Vero and somebody asked me, "Oh, thanks for your work. It's really interesting." And I said, "Like, yeah, my mind it's always thinking about the small things, the big things. I'm always, thinking about things and how
Mm-hmm.
they work and why they work
Mm-hmm.
and how they impact us and how they're gonna impact throughout the time, right? It's just my mind works in mysterious ways, right? So, for example, I think the last project that I can say, for sure, it's say, oh, I have a friend who was talking about projects and science and life and we always talking about like how we are influenced by different things and so many things like
Mm-hmm.
politics, science, environment, art, and like all these things that we get interested in. And well, the last project it was the calendar for 2003. I always make calendars. Look, I think it's the fourth time that I have made calendars.
Mm-hmm.
This year I focused on the trees of oak and basically more intriguing or more focused on acorns
Mm-hmm.
which have a different weird shape and the reason I got into this project was I was doing another again another project
Yeah.
called backyard poetry, which I was inviting people to come into my backyard and perform art, regardless if it's poetry, music, or different things.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the persons who came told me, "Oh, thank you for inviting me, or son." And then she started talking about like, "Oh, we're gonna have these reclaiming homes from East LA, some project that has to do with gentrification and
Mm-hmm.
also the freeway taking over some houses. And
Oh,
I don't know
okay.
exactly the whole details." So she told me, "Oh, we're gonna replant like some of the gardens of
Mm-hmm.
a house that they reclaimed, right?" So I went and a couple of friends that she has, and she mentioned that the acorns have this cool story. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know about the because later on I checked more of the story, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the validity of it. It's not Native American, but I think it's more new. It's not an ancient tale. But they were saying that there was the god, basically the creator, told them like these acorns to prepare themselves some hats, right? and every acorn started making their own, weaving their own hats,
Yeah.
right? And everyone came with cool different hats, and I don't remember the name of the acorn. Just I don't want to say it on a record, but
Yeah.
basically the acorn didn't know how much or how good his hat was, so he wasn't really confident. And so the point was, so they will meet the humans, right? Like and tell like this is ours, like
Mhm.
this is my hat. And so he was a little insecure, and so the creator told him, "Oh, well, yeah, the other acorns have beautiful hats, but let's say maybe you don't feel too good about your hat, right?
Mhm.
But I'm gonna give you a gift. I'm gonna make you the most delicious of all the acorns."
Interesting.
And so the Indians, I think it's the Shumash, who became infatuated by this acorn, and so they really like this acorn because of that.
Mhm.
And so I got really intrigued. Like I never knew that the acorns had different hats and
Yeah.
different varieties of them. And so I started researching and creating basically a calendar of 12 months of
Uh-huh.
different acorns. The first month, January, is different. I just wanted to make sure people knew what the acorns
Yeah.
parts were, right? Like the hat and the body and the leaves. That's a little different things that you have to look for in order for you to see what the acorn is, right?
Mhm.
And so I created that, and again, it goes back to meeting somebody,
Yeah.
and from that, what you take and how you
Mhm.
create. And I always look into like, okay, this sounds like a really interesting. So I think art that comes from a place where you are really intrigued or fascinated, or you yourself as an artist are interested, regardless, because you find it, you know, colorful, or you find it funny,
Mhm.
or you find it really, full of facts.
Mhm.
That's what gets you into creating something and seeing where you're gonna take it. And that's what I took
Yeah.
that. I created a calendar about acorns just because
Interesting.
of a conversation that I had.
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, I'm familiar with your art.
Mm.
Obviously, there's a reason why you were hired to work with Distal Arts. But like, do you feel like when you go out, and I know that photography
Mm,
is the thing that you do probably
mm,
the most, but when you go out, do you have in your mind the work of other artists that you would want to emulate? People
mm,
that you look up to, that maybe you want to steal a technique, or
mm,
you want to maybe do a technique, but maybe add on to it, put your own flavor to
mm.
it.
Well, this is a thing that I don't know if it is distinguishing me from other artists,
Hmm.
or I'm just a weird person, but I think you know that. Like, I get really tired or bored of things, so
Mhm.
I always go into the next thing.
Yeah.
And not in a like, oh, I got bored. It's more like if I get interested to a different thing, like the
Hmm.
story of the acorns, right? Now it's
Hmm.
like, what's next? I'm always for the next. What's next? I think that's what makes life interesting, is knowing there's something there, some
Hmm.
mystery to discover, or something
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
reveal, right?
Yeah.
And so like that conversation, or one of the photographers that I like is like, like one guy who went to the Yosemite and created one of the I think it was one of the members of the what's the name of this, put it later, I don't know, the
Ansel Adams.
Amstel Adams. There you go. But he was member of the what's the Canyon Club, or I forgot the name of
Yeah,
it.
something like that. Yeah.
Damn it, the Rocky Mountains Club. I forgot the name of it. I'm bad with names. But
Yeah,
guys
you are.
might know, like people who know, like. But I again,
Surprised you even
that's
know my name.
yeah. Like it took me a while. It took me a while. But he's one of the reasons I
Uh-huh.
really like enjoy photography. It's like
Yeah.
into the nature, right? Because again, it's either nature. I like street photography.
Yeah.
Luis also, I know that he likes
Yeah.
street photography, and I like fashion. It's just it's a complicated love and hate
Yeah.
situation with fashion, but it has its good things and its bad things, right?
Mhm.
And that's another story.
Yeah.
Or science. Like last time I went to with my friend, we went to the beach, and we're looking into rocks. 'Cause she's a geologist,
Uh-huh.
and I started taking photos of. We found a skull well, like from a well. We had the
Really?
skull, and you
Hmm.
can see it on the rock,
Uh-huh.
and it's just fascinating. And I posted on again. Beto is the new
Yeah.
app that I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
trying, and not promoting, but if we get cash from Beto, I'm just saying.
Hey. Hey.
So I posted it a lot. I got a good reactions of people or in Instagram
Yeah.
because I think it's really interesting to see it things that you might just walk by.
Mm-hmm.
Especially
Mm-hmm.
we walk in a low tide. I mean that's the whole point. Like
Yeah.
some of the things get revealed in low
Yeah.
tide because the waves cover most of the time.
Hmm.
But we found those ones and she's explaining, okay, this is what. And again, I have done some geology or archaeology before,
Hmm.
and paleontology, and but I've been called, so it took me a while. Oh, okay, and then
Yeah.
after she explained a couple of things, okay, I start seeing, and we found different ones, not just that one. We
Hmm.
found neck vertebrae
Oh,
from
wow.
whales that live like millions of years back. So it's really interesting to see those things.
Yeah.
And again, that's the way I approach art. Of like, what's the thing that's capturing my attention?
Mm-hmm.
Let me show you that, because I think that's what makes art interesting, is giving access
Hmm.
to people things that they might not find
Yeah.
access with. Like, and even we talk to a couple of photographers or biographers or
Mm-hmm.
uh, poets who explain things that other people are not able to see or match themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
then they see them and like, oh, this
Mm-hmm.
explains what I was thinking,
Mm-hmm.
or I didn't know that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what I get really fascinated about into art right now, like how I'm gonna explain something that people might not know of or might not see it the same way I
Yeah.
do, right? And that's really interesting way of seeing life, I think.
It's funny that you bring up that I'm into street
Hmm.
photography because um, I was gonna say, one of the photographers that I really like a lot and that definitely inspires me
Hmm.
is you might know him, Sebastião Salgado.
Ooh.
Yeah, and Sebastião Salgado obviously takes inspiration from people like Ansel Adams because
Mm.
he's all about the like landscape
Mm.
photography and aerial photography. I love his aerial
Oof.
photography. Um, but the thing about someone like Sebastião Salgado and the way that it informs my photography practice
Hmm.
is that I'm all about like the pattern, and
Hmm.
contrasts. So when I'm out walking and taking photos,
Hmm.
it's usually that what I'm looking for. I'm looking for patterns. I'm looking for contrasts. I like to shoot black and white, and that's its own thing. But
Yeah.
uh, but for street photography, if you take some of those
Uh,
concepts of the contrast
yeah.
and that kind of thing, you get some really interesting results.
Yes.
Do you ever feel like you do that with other photography that
Mm.
inspires you?
Well, again, I have two approaches. So every time, like you were saying, I
Yeah,
got influenced by his
yeah,
work or her work
yeah.
or they work, or
Mm-hmm.
depending on who or what team or what person put it on text or put it on print or put it in a canvas
Mm-hmm.
or in song. It's always, yeah, you get influence, and I think people who might not know the way creativity works in creating and the mechanism of at hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't. Sometimes they feel like, oh, you just follow his steps or you
Mm-hmm.
just copy him. Like,
Mm-hmm.
no, it's, and everybody, even the people you might think of
Yeah.
the main creators, they follow somebody else, and we have this legacy of you created this. I'll take some of that and create my
Mm-hmm.
own thing. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, and sometimes I thinking like I'm gonna shoot this way, and
Mm-hmm.
again, I think that it's easier to see sometimes art visually if you're a visual person and
Mm-hmm.
photography, because photography has this way of seeing the world definitely through a lens,
Oh
and the
yeah.
lens is the key, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
how you're gonna shoot it, what are you looking for, how are you gonna basically clean the image into what you think, and what you're looking for. Like, for example, if you're looking for black and white, there's some great photographers who create these.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have too much 50 Shades of Grey
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
making that into a
Yeah.
into a pun, but it is basically there's a lot of different lights in between. It's just black and white, and you see
Mm-hmm.
this contrast that's really powerful, and people like to create that. And
Mm-hmm.
even if you see, like, just walking by in the streets, you see a lot of tones and
Mm-hmm.
colors. But if you went looking for that contrast, you will
Mm-hmm.
shoot for that. And
Mm-hmm.
knowing previously, I'm aiming for that. And so it again is the eye of the beholder,
Right.
which is the artist in this
Yeah.
case, which I always think like everybody's an artist, just for you to say, okay, I'm gonna show you what I created instead of just keeping it to yourself. I think that's the main key for it. Okay, with that in mind, I just wanted to ask you. We have been to different art scenes or book shows, and I know you have this technique that you really, I don't know, home into or that you're really proficient at, and that I really enjoy because I mean, it goes back to like when you start poetry, you think about like I'm never gonna finish a poem in 3 days. Like it just that kind of sense of this is a big of a task, right? But again, it goes back to how much have you tried, how much experience you have, and I know you have this system into which you ask a couple of questions into the people who is gonna buy this custom made poem, and like I wanted to know like how do you came out with this system of asking people questions and turning out with a poem that's really into like what's the name of it, custom made.
Yeah, well, so I think it was the very first zine fest that we actually participated in. And one of the very first zine fests was the LA Zine Fest in 2014, I want to say. So it's been a long time that I've been doing that technique in particular. And when I started doing it, the reason for doing it was to get people interested in coming to our table. So it started off as kind of like a gimmick, to get people excited about just coming and checking out our zines.
But before Luis gets continue with the like the Weissen house, like I just wanted to know like he has this old typewriter that he has on the booth, and people really I mean.
Just by itself.
It's a beautiful typewriter, like it calls you like into like oh let me see like this. It's almost like an antique shop, right? Like let's and the sounds of it, like you can hear the clicking and clacking and all that. It's an experience. Just saying, just to put you into the environment of it.
Yeah.
So
but and that's partly true. You know, I mean, it's kind of like instead of having somebody standing outside just in front of the table and saying, hey, come check out our work, our work, you have the sound of the typewriter, and that sound does for a lot of people bring back memories. It makes them nostalgic for something maybe they never experienced themselves. But to get back to the question of like what made that technique possible was basically my approach to poetry, especially for the personalized poems, was to really get people to tell me just enough about themselves for me to write a poem that is really, I want to say about them, but not always about them, just about being human like them. And so there's always going to be 3 questions that I ask. And this is even for people that buy it off of the website. There's not often that I get it, but every now and then on the DSTL Arts website, people can actually buy a personalized poem for $5. The price will go up eventually because of inflation. But for $5, people get 3 questions, and the 3 questions are usually going to be something related to like a who question, a when question, and a where question. So it's like location, time, and people. And those 3 things are usually enough for me to kind of find something that those people that buy it, can relate with. And eventually, after like about 15 minutes using their answers, I will write a poem. The poem sometimes is directly about them, sometimes it's about a person that they want the poem to be dedicated to. But in the end, what I find usually happens is people will read the poem and really enjoy it because it has something that is unique to them. But what I really found fascinating and probably gratifying the most was later when I started actually collecting the poems into a book. And I collected the poems into the People's Poetry Volume 1. And that's only like 2 years
Mhm.
worth. I think it was 2013 to 2015 when I first started doing it. And that little collection, one of the best compliments I ever received was at a zine fest. It was actually at the East LA comic book festival that they had,
Mhm.
the East LA Cape. And this girl came up to the table, and it was her very first book of poetry that she had ever bought. And the reason why she bought it was because even though all of the poems were about other people or for other people, every time that she would turn a page, she would have this reaction where she kept saying, "Oh my God, this speaks to me. Oh my God, this is about me. Oh my God, this is about my sister. Oh my God, this is about, my all of her relationships,
Yeah.
whether with herself or with people in her family." And to me, that was when I really realized that art and poetry specifically, can really have an impact on an individual when it's specific but universal at the same time. There's universality in being specific, and that to me was amazing.
And again, it just I find amazing how it's just this way of, I think artists have this way of making it sometimes about themselves too
Mm-hmm.
much, and nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's good to think about like your feelings, your thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes you have to step out and think what other people is feeling,
Mm-hmm.
thinking, and living. And I think that's when you start stepping outside of this box of yourself, when you connect. And I think that's the whole point of art, it's connections. It's how do you step out of yourself and become the others.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what brings us into this, I don't know, connectivityness,
Mm-hmm.
like the internet never did, right?
Yeah, yeah, the great promise of the
The
internet,
great promise of the internet.
or the great
And
promise of
never,
social media.
yeah. And,
Yeah.
and it becomes something other than yourself. And you start
Mm-hmm.
thinking, I'm going to write about her,
Mm-hmm.
them, they, and him, her.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it just becomes something other than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, when you start really clicking.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it goes back to this moment of, I feel this, but I want to see what you're thinking,
Mm-hmm.
see what you're
Mm-hmm.
feeling, where you're coming from,
Mm-hmm.
and using, again, I think this is the power of the artist, right? Having a sense of taking things in, absorbing them,
Mm-hmm.
and to bring them out into
Mm-hmm.
something that's just beautiful and
Mm-hmm.
horrible. It just both ways. It
Uh-huh.
just you
Uh-huh.
never. I always tell people, don't get too caught up into like this feels too dark, it's too happy. Like no, like bring it the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
And you are this cycle of things that come on into a beast that people never thought it would look or feel, but they still connect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your questions bring that out into people, and because it's not just like the questions they answer now, it's like you take those and put them into your machine, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the Luis machine,
Yeah. Yeah.
and taking them into like this fucking raw thing
Mm-hmm.
that's gonna tell you something you didn't know,
Yeah.
or something you feel like, oh wow, I felt that, but I never had the words to put it into
Yeah.
perspective or to into that kind of situation. That's the reason we're here, right? Like
Oh yeah.
we
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
those ways into like art evolves into
Mm-hmm.
like becomes something
Mm-hmm.
nobody expects.
Yeah. Totally. And I think that I like how you phrased it. Right. It goes through the Luis machine,
Yeah.
meaning like at least the way that I interpret that is, it goes through like a filtering process
Hmm.
of my point of view, my interpretation of other people's work, and
Hmm.
my interpretation of their personality, maybe even, and I'm curious, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but for you and your own artwork, when is it that happens for you? When is it that you start to
Mm,
approach things through the Abraham machine
mm,
by taking in other people's work or other people's experiences so that you can transmit that
mm.
through your artwork?
Ah, interesting. It's yeah, and again, I put it out there, but I
Yeah,
never like thought about it that way
yeah,
until like you put it up. And man, like I have a couple of friends. Like I mean, we have different friends of like how we
hmm,
talk differently, and some friends that we sometimes throw more deep and
yeah,
more meaningful things into the conversations, right? And it's just always like, how do I ask something into the world, right? Like,
hmm,
or even absorb, right? Like you see things,
hmm,
and I always have that eye to like, let me see it, or let me feel it, or let me hear it.
hmm,
And I have again the I think it's the artist thing of like we absorb things, and
hmm,
then we we have, I don't know, a mysterious thing. It's just like a
hmm,
magical thing.
uh-huh,
Because again, I am in science, but these are things that are too complex to put into an equation,
hmm,
and we have a way of putting our experiences. Like we have different backgrounds, right?
hmm,
We
hmm,
have different experiences, and then we also have different way of thinking. So we put it into again the machine,
hmm,
which is ourselves,
yeah,
which it just blows my mind, right? And then we put it out there.
yeah,
So again, it's just me. Like somebody tells me, "Oh, I have this problem with my dad," right? Like
hmm,
he was womanizer, let's say that, right?
yeah, yeah,
And he bring this and that, but then my brain goes into, well, yeah, he was that, but still people like him,
hmm,
like
hmm,
how is this connection? It just be serious, but it's still, it's me telling you like, well,
hmm,
you might see it this way,
hmm,
which is fair. Again, I never had that kind of downgrading or thinking my thoughts are bigger than or so on. It's just me saying, yeah, you see it
hmm,
this way, pause it.
hmm, hmm,
It's fair. It's perfectly fine.
hmm,
Now let me tell you what I see, which again is my machine, right? Like
hmm,
everybody has their own
hmm,
little machines, and they're rusted, and maybe some are newer, electric,
right, yeah,
solar power machines. But we have different ways of seeing the world,
uh-huh,
and all are fucking fascinating, which is the reason. I mean, that's the reason DSLR exists. We want to
hmm,
see what everybody has in
oh
their
yeah,
mind, right? How
totally,
they process things.
hmm,
And to me, it's like what brings
hmm,
so many people into your womanizer parent, right?
hmm,
Like
hmm,
he must have been a good person in terms of carrying, in terms of bringing so many people in, or maybe he was so good at being bad
hmm,
that bring them in. But it's just me
hmm,
thinking, okay, you just that's your thought. Now let me tell you mine.
hmm,
And I think we have to respect their thoughts, meaning
hmm,
everybody has either. Sometimes I think they are really don't see a lot of things because again, everybody has different perspectives,
yeah,
but we also have different filters, and so it's good to have those conversations and to my filter tells me this.
hmm,
Let me show you this. But it's still not, I'm not going to tell you yours is wrong. It's just
hmm,
different.
hmm,
And I think once we have those conversations, and I think that's the reason our blog is going to be really interesting is seeing our artists
hmm,
telling us their filters,
hmm,
their
hmm,
machines, right?
yeah,
Like how they're clicking, how they're
yeah,
turning, right? All the gears that are
yeah,
moving and how they're going to speed out some type of art.
yeah,
And again, we go back to art because I think art is an expression of our thinking, our
hmm,
feelings, and how we use these machines that we are.
yeah,
And we tell you what we see.
hmm,
And believe me, I have speaking to many people like drunk, sober, and so on.
hmm,
It's just fascinating to see how people think. You sometimes think everybody has the same concept of
hmm,
reality, but We are
Mm-hmm.
just little machines working separately,
Yeah.
having different reactions to the world. And this is where art becomes this, I don't know, like museum of weirdness that we, I don't know,
Interesting.
it's fascinating. It's like
Yeah.
it's the best Netflix show if you think about it.
Yeah. 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 I like how you're
Hmm.
phrasing that, which it really does bring it back to
Hmm.
our theme, this year's theme for Art Blog Zine, which is intertextuality. And in a lot of ways, it's like what you were saying. It's the way that you filter things through your
Hmm.
own machine. It's about those conversations that you have as an artist with other artists and the work that inspires you. So I think that's a good spot
Yeah.
for us to just put in that little plug for anybody listening or
Hmm.
watching that's interested in submitting to the next issue of Art Blog Zine. Just visit our website at dstlarts.org/artblogzine. You can get all of the details of the submission guidelines, plus our uh, we'll say interpretation of intertextuality and the conversation between art and text, which is this year's theme. And you'll also have some other opportunities there on our website to get to know more about us, get to maybe even participate in some of
Yes.
our other programs, which we have several that are actually right now either starting or are seeking more submissions on other themes, including the cost of living, the social
Well, yeah, it's
contract.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, that one's going to be a really interesting series that's called Decent Living right now. And then, of course, our Conchas y Cafe, which is a 3 times a year, a triennial zine and workshop series. And yeah, we're probably running out of time, so we'll probably go ahead and wrap it up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the last thing is be ready, bring your art, and don't be afraid of it.
Hmm.
And I really want to see you. Like that's the whole point of the podcast. We want to talk to more artists and see their
Hmm.
perspective and their stories, and that is gonna reach other artists most likely, right? That's the whole point of
Yeah.
this live or I don't know apps that we have
Yeah.
nowadays, and that's our goal, and to
Hmm.
meet more people and see their perspectives, and they will have other people who might be interested, inspired, and that's the
Hmm.
whole thing. So
Yeah.
hopefully we'll see you in the next one, and
Hmm.
reach out and email us or contact us,
Yeah.
and we have a lot of programs, and I guess this is where art meets, right? Like
Hmm.
artists, we we want to see you here.
Yeah. Exactly. We want to see you here.
Yeah.
So again, DSTLARTS.org. That's our website, Distill Arts. You can follow us on pretty much all the major social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, at DSTL Arts. And of course, you're welcome to like and subscribe to either the podcast using Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and also YouTube, where
Hmm.
those of you watching the video version of the
Hmm.
podcast are welcome to comment, and we'll try to get back to you through there as well. So thanks again, y'all. We definitely want y'all to submit your artwork, send us work, and we look forward to sharing the work of other artists along with us in our own
Hmm.
conversations.
Awesome.
All right. So peace out.
Peace out.